Hello, this is the Harboring Light. I'm Mary. I'll give a conservative perspective about the world around me. Feedback is immensely important. Feel free to reach out. And with the holiday season, Christmas is just around the corner, and then New Year's, February, January, with New Year's, Easter, so forth. List goes on. You have holiday stories you want to share? Feel free to reach out. Or show ideas. And the best way to do that is through email. Alright, so some of the audio platforms that I'm on Spreaker, Spotify, Pandora, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music. I'm pretty much on everything, so it won't be hard to find me. Alright, so it's Friday, so I'm focusing in on all of you. This time I'm focusing in on the Italiano, the Italian language. Here we go. Okay, and of course, sources will be provided for you. Okay, let me pull it up. All right, just 1 minute. All right. Okay. Okay, here we go. All right, it says, and then I'm going to expand onto this. So, image means a lot. And the aspects of Italy, has encompassed the American aspects of traditions passed down from, immigrants who came here from Italy. And then a lot of traditional roots that we have as far as how we view cuisine, as far as how we view fashion, And as far as how we think about, evidently enough, with Starbucks and coffee and, with the aspects of venti and trinity, which is a massive amount of unnecessary calories. The Italian roots has really gave a lot into the aspects of cultural value. Now, language in itself is a complement to it. And it's quite interesting, when you get in the mix of everything, how romantic languages tie in together and how the roots of everything sound similar, but the cultural aspects of how it's speaking is quite different. For instance, Spanish is not the same as French, and Italian is not the same as Spanish and French, even though they're both housed in the same language family. And the root of the matter comes from Latin. Now, Latin is very implemental in the aspects of how language is diversified, I think that's poor word choice here, let me rephrase that. In the aspects of class. So what do I mean by class? So there is a clear, decisive division between Latin and the aspects of other languages. Even the aspects of Italian, how it's rooted in Latin. And then, of course, Spanish is rooted in Latin. But specifically, Latin was supposed to be for the elitists and the academic. And then Latin is supposed to be a form of representing, where is the division between the people who speak it. Well, what does it that actually mean? So if you speak Latin, that means you have the fortunate ability to be, have wealth, to have been able to pursue academia, whereas the aspects of speaking other languages and forming other languages outside Latin, that means that you are of other means of common wealth or common so forth. In the aspects of wealth, where wealth in a metaphorical sense, where your wealth by spirit and by your family and all of this. So there's a lot of ties that has to do with the Italian aspects of this too, with class and structure and the means of how that's divided between different social status as well. So let's dive in here. It says the Italian, now I'm reading from the AI generated response here. It says the Italian language originated from Vulgar Latin, the colloquial tongue-tied, the all common, let's say that, okay, true form of Latin spoken by the common people of the Roman Empire, which spread across Europe through Roman conquest. So after the fall of the Roman Empire in the 5th century, regional variations of Vulgar Latin evolved into distinct Roman languages, with Italian developing primarily from the Tuscan dialect, especially from the Florentine variety. So the literary foundation of modern Italian was established in the 13th and the 14th century by influential writers such as Dante Alighieri. Dante, when you get the aspects of the excerpts of his work in the Odyssey, and Francisco Petrarch and Giovanni Botticelli. I'm sorry. Sorry, guys. You know how you see something and you're like, no, that's not quite right. So, Botticelli, who works in the Florentine dialect, which helped shape the standardize the language. I think it's Botticcio, or I think it is Botticcio. I appreciate you Italian listeners out there. Feel free to weigh in on that because it's spelled Boccaccio. So, help me out with that. The first known written documents in Italy in the Palacete Assennisi, which dates back to about 960 and provides early evidence of the language in its emergence. Okay, so let's go on and in-depth aspects of the Italian language. Okay, and so of course, when you get into the Italian Renaissance specifically to me, and I mean, it's kind of, if you pay attention to it, it makes a lot of sense. Was all about the aspects of defining humanity and the spirit of man, whether that be from scientific points of view and whether that be from our spiritual point of view. And it was really encapsulated in the aspects of Michelangelo and the Sistine Chapel. So all of his works, they really, are marveled after and thought about and rendered and their analysis, the analysis of it, and they replicas of it, as far as paintings and so forth. So the aspects of that is, like I said before, when you're able to connect with people from a simple point of view where it has to do with your plight in this world and how your disposition looks, that's going to resonate with all kinds of generations. That's something that's never going to change. And so this is another element of language, of how that goes with that idea. So when you get in the cusp of everything with languages, excuse me, I'll be right back. Okay. So, like I was saying, when you get in the aspects of languages, why is it that certain dialects withstand or are able to go on and develop, and versus others that just kind of fall to the wayside? It's, I think, simply enough with the aspects of it has a root that is not, that's relatable to the senses of the people who are speaking it. And it's able to adapt to the environment and to move into the way in which people are living. And that is in itself really the way to look at language and communication. Because, we hear all of these aspects, specifically when we talk about how the negative part of communication, with miscommunication, where reinterpreting something to meet a certain ideology, and all of these things essentially break down the means of being able to understand each other. And so let's take a look and see how the aspects of the Italian language is able to, which are, other languages and, more polished language, our polished language that we have in our world here. Let's take a look and see the history behind the aspects of that and with the Italian language. So the Italian language stems directly from Latin, just as I said earlier, just like other Romantic languages like Spanish, Catalan, Portuguese, French, Romanian, and other minority language as the Octon and the Latin, for example. All right. So the Italian language has developed through a long and gradual process which began after the fall of the Roman Empire in the 15th century. So up until then, the Latin had spread and had been imposed across the empires as the lingua franca, or the shared language. So after the fall of the empire, the vernacular and the local forms of the language had an important role in society and everyday life of the population. However, for several centuries, and especially during the Middle Ages, Latin was the dominant cultural language used throughout Europe, universities, and the official acts and procedures of the church. Okay, so the first recording of writings in Italian. So the first documents written in the vernacular, which was the language usually spoken by the general population, dates all the way back to 960. So these are labeled as the so-called Palatihi, forgive me for the pronunciation, Casinisi, which proves that some territories located near the city of Kappa and Cappaea belonged to a monastery of the Benedictine monks. So from the start of the 13th century, large amounts of literature and especially poems began to publish in regional Italian. The largest push and most significant contributions were made by the Sicilian poets in the 13th century, who were then followed by those from Tuscany, the most important being Dante Alighieri, and also, as I stated before, Giovanni Boccaccio and Francisco Petrarch. So the foundations of modern Italian. So from the historical perspective, it is not wrong to claim that the high or cultural Tuscan dialect, which are the three most important poets of the 1300s. So yes, despite this, the Italian language as we know it today is the result of a long process of the evolution and debates which began in the 1600s. So over that, the correct form of the language remained, even though at the end of the 1800s, many writers and cultural figures were inspired by the Tuscan model. In every aspect of the language, there are several relevant historical and social factors that need to be considered. So first, for centuries up until the unification of Italy in 1861, the country was divided into a number of different states, which were usually under foreign rule. And this happens a lot of times of how when, for example, the American point of view acceding from the Union, that in itself grants access to people to develop their own ideas about how to structuralize their culture, their society, and then, in this case, language. All right, so it says, which were usually under foreign rule, and Italy was united in 1861, the decision was taken to make Tuscan the official language of the country. So within the Italian population, however, there were and always has been high rates of illiteracy. So in this illiteracy, it continued to be predominantly in rural regions until the 1950s. So as a result of this, dialects were used as the everyday language for centuries, and anyone who was able to express them and communicate in Italian did so using grammatical, lexical, and phonetic aspects was influenced by the regional and local dialects. Use of dialects in Italy. The use of dialects in Italian represents a unique situation compared to the rest of Europe. Even today, in many different parts of Italy, dialects are used in an informal way of communicating in different social settings and written and within the families. So to the contrary to this, to popular belief, that is, in certain Italian regions, dialects are widely used. And not only within the older generations, even throughout the use of standard Italian, which prevails in younger generations. So many young people can express themselves in their own dialect, or at least understand it, in informal social situations, or settings. It is also worth remembering that dialects as well as accents can change a lot within the same region. So if you take Tuscany, for example, even though there aren't real proper aspects of dialect, the Florentine accent greatly differs from the Pisa or the even that of the Lucca or the Abruzzo, for instance. So in other regions, it is easy to spot dialect differences between places in the same province, or even those in just a few kilometers away from one another. So, dialects and regional Italian. So for a long time, dialects have been incorrectly considered the poor and impoverished parents of standard Italian. So which has mainly developed from Tuscan dialect, yet in reality, dialects represent cultural richness. This can be seen, in fact, in the last 50 years in many regional terms from Tuscany, Lombardy, Veneto, Naples, and Sicily, which have entered the national language. So as much as it isn't surprising, surprisingly enough, that dialect has been heavily studied by linguistics and have been used in literary and poetry. So in the past, there were prejudice towards dialects, with people thinking that standard Italian was a language used by the bourgeoisie. And so, this is a very good example of the aspects of how you sound really amps the aspects of how people judge you. So what do I mean by this? Case in point, from the American point of view. So, when I was growing up, there was a term called ebonics. So if you sound like that, which makes a whole lot of sense. You sound uneducated. You sound like there's something wrong with you. But it was taken to the aspects of, at first it was a joke, and then it was taken to the aspects of literally being influenced into rap culture, with some rappers, changing it and using ebonics to sound like, to reform itself into mumble rapping. Now, if you're from the South, which I'm from the South, and you have a quick, long draw, it depending which parts of the South you're from. So if you're from the deeper part of the South, we're talking Alabama, we're talking, the Carolinas, you're talking, certain parts of Georgia and so forth, Mississippi. You are perceived on the surface to be uneducated, when that's just certainly not the case. And a lot of times, the way you sound does not eject who you actually are. And so this is a real aspect of how fundamental language and the sound and the tonal use of language really evokes a lot of rendering it with the social status of how that carries with somebody and how that changes the aspects of the quality of life too. All right, so for example, recent statistics have revealed that in Viento, which is one of the most economically developed regions, around half of the population speak in dialects, both in their families and with friends. So, while dialects were used by farmers and the working class, this prejudice has almost died out. Let me say that again. So, while dialects were used by farmers and the working class, these prejudice has not entirely died out. So all you need to do is to walk around one of the beautiful and historic cities of Vento, like Venice and Verona, for example, to realize just how present dialects are in urban cities. So the spreading of standardized Italian. So in 1950, I'm going to wrap up with this. I'm going to go on because this is pretty interesting here. And I think it's vital for y'all to hear it too. Important, to each his own. But I think it's pretty interesting here. All right, so let me go. So in the 50s, just as the country was going through a time of complete infraction, economic aspects of change, social and political change, and reconstruction, less than 20% of the Italian population spoke Italian fluently in their everyday today life. So literacy and semi-literacy were largely present in various groups of the population. So the Italian Constitution, which was established in 1948, gave everyone the right to a basic education. Yet in certain situations, this right to an education was not completely granted. So access to higher education in the university was pretty much only reserved for the children from more affluent families. So this meant that many children did not finish primary school, even though the law demanded they stay in school until they were 18 or at least 20, before taking part in the military service. So TV programs began to be broadcast by the RAI, the state broadcaster, in 1954 on just one channel. In the years of that following up, the economic boom between 1958 and 1962, television did not become a way to bring people together, as very few people actually had a TV set. So both also, it was a way to broadcast cultural programs and linguistic models. So, in fact, between 1960 and 1968, the RAI broadcast a show in the late afternoon, which was called, the aspects of that being translated, It's Never Too Late, was presented by a teacher by the name of Alberto Manzini. As a result of the show, many illiterate people learned to read and write. And it is estimated that in this period, around 1.5 million Italians managed to get their certificates of primary education. And so the spread of standardized Italian language was aided by the economic growth and a better quality of life and the gradual spread of education and linguistic programs shown on TV. So TV and standardized Italian. While passing of time, this has, in the 1980s of the passing of time of this, let me start out by saying that first, and then instead of flipping it over. Okay, so as television has become becoming more commercially successful, shows were becoming more just as entertaining and more trivial, and sometimes vulgar or ordinary, and shows behavior far removed from reality. So, with the passing of time, this had a quite negative effect on the cultural education of the younger generations and has introduced much more simple language. full of slang, but lacking the words and syntax. Now, I'm happy that they're talking about this because this is very prevalent in the aspects of how language is, in a sense, changes itself into the aspects of being more rooted in pop culture. And then we get jargon, we get slang and so forth. And they're saying that if you root yourself too much into that, which is, definitely true, there's a balance to everything, that you can lose sight of or be misdirected in the aspects of having a well-endowed language development of how to communicate properly and communicate well. All right, so Italian languages as of today. So research carried out a few years before the death of the famous Italian linguist Toledo di Mauro, which he died in 2017, confirmed that in everyday conversations, around half of the population only use 3,000 words. So furthermore, similar research confirmed that in certain groups of the population, and not necessarily in the most disadvantaged, the use of the certain fundamental grammatical aspects like the subjunctive is incorrect or sometimes just completely left out or ignored. Thanks to a state decree in 2007, the compulsory school attendance age was raised from 14 to 16. This means that students now have to complete at least 10 years of education made up of 5 years of primary school and 3 years of middle school and then 2 years of high school. So it is the job of schools as well as families to provide an adequate cultural linguistic education for children. And this is very prevalent in the aspects of American culture, which, it takes a village really. And this imagery comes a lot and rooted in a lot in the aspects of the Italian culture, that both the parents and the teacher and the school system have to bridge the gap together in order to get the best foundation for the child to be successful with education, for your children to be very successful. So, however, in some cases, this does not happen. Or at least doesn't happen completely due to several different factors. Schools and lessons aren't actually up to date, which means that students can't develop critical thinking skills. So the growing invasion of technology like smartphones, tablets, and social media, and a small number of students who read a writing ability, which is less than refined or is more under threat due to the aspects of the aforementioned reasons. So as a result, in certain scientific facilities of university, written Italian tests have been introduced to test the abilities of students. So the Accademia della Crusca, the Italian Linguistic Academy, which is based in the Medici Villa of Castello in Florence, is the body in charge of checking and registering every linguistic phenomenon and change. So I think that's quite at the aspects of what should be understood and should be the foundation of breaking that down of how valuable language is, and to always get in that format of the learning as much as you can, and to nurturing it and cherishing it, and then implementing that thirst for other generations. Because that, in fact, is the aspects of how to solve a lot of issues that go on in our day-to-day. Because simply getting, persuaded by the mass media, or not having the adequate aspects of knowledge that is able to enrich your language of choice, or with your native tongue, that really is a factor in how people, are move about from every day to day. And then, of course, there's circumstances beyond our ability to change with the aspects, and that keeps people in, their plight of not being able to move forward. But, there's a lot that can be said with, us people and societies implementing and making that welcomed to where we all check on each other. There's a checks and balance to ensure that, there's no cracks in the system as much as possible. Nothing's foolproof, and it's, ignorant, and it's just unreasonable to think that things are foolproof to get everything everywhere. It's just not possible. But to have a good foundation and to make sure that the thirst for being able to understand your language as well as you can and to communicate with each other as much as possible will solve a lot of issues, I think, in our world around us. And it also explains a lot of how this division that we're living in, which would be nothing new, it would still go on until the earth either stops spinning or the sun burns out, or whatever. That's just what it is. So this reaches the end of the Harboring Light. Tune in, turn up, and definitely take care. Bye-bye for now.